Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 6 of the From the A to the Bay podcast. Jordan Watkins alongside Kevin Dan. What's going on, KD?
What's going on, Waddy? Happy to be here with you. Forgive me for my ignorance. I see the hoodie; it's looking nice. Who is the person on the front of it?
Yeah, so this is Stacey Abrams. Anyone who was following the election and her Fair Fight Action campaign was really responsible, getting a lot of people registered to vote in this last election. And from what I hear, she's already hitting the road, getting ready for the runoff coming up in January. So, as a little shout out to Stacey, who, again,
Nice.
I think, my opinion, should be the governor of Georgia. Maybe it's a blessing in disguise that she wasn't. But so, yeah, it's just a little tribute and shout out to her and all the work that she and everyone around her has been doing.
Right on. Yeah, I mean, she was obviously huge for turning out the Democratic vote in Georgia. Uh, that was incredible work that she did there.
Absolutely. And again, shout out my mom because she was also working with Fair Fight as well during
Nice.
the campaign. I know she's telling me, excuse me, during the election, and she was telling me once it's time to hit the road running again for the runoff, she's going to be right there with them. Of course, the 2 Senate seats still up in the state of Georgia. So let's get to it. Yesterday, huge day on the NBA schedule. Shout out to ESPN and the NBA for the job that they did. Obviously, it was virtual, but still a pretty good production overall. And I think for the most part, at least the top, I'd say 3, 4, 5 picks. No, not too many big surprises. I know, and we'll touch on this later. There was a question if what happened with the Warriors news, and again, like I said, we'll tap into that in a bit, would change up who they drafted. But again, Kevin, as we talked about before, James Wiseman seemed like the whole time just the obvious pick for the Warriors to get.
Yeah, I mean the people that I talked to, and it's not like I have crazy sources here or whatever, but it was everyone kind of felt like James Wiseman should be the guy, and he turned out to be the guy. And I mean, it was a small sample size at Memphis, but you saw what he could do. And 7'1" with a wingspan. I've heard his wingspan at either 7'4" or 7'6". Either way, that's incredible. And yeah, he's just you need, as we saw in the NBA playoffs, people might want to say the center position is dead, but it really isn't. So
At all.
you need a five, and James Wiseman was the best five available, and so you take him. And now your center depth is legit. You have Marquise Chris coming off the bench, giving you 15 to 20 minutes. I think that's perfect for Marquise with James Wiseman. And now, obviously, there's a hole at shooting guard now, but and we'll get into that. But I don't think you didn't have all the information on Wednesday afternoon, 1 hour before the draft, when you
Mm-hmm.
find out Clay gets hurt. You can't scrap your whole draft plan and say, all right, well, what if Clay is out for the year, when you don't know that for sure? And obviously we know it now, but you spent months on this. For months, James Wiseman was your guy. You're not changing that then.
And even to top it off, everyone for the most part, and I know some people will say there's no clear cut or there wasn't a clear cut number one guy in this draft class. But when I looked at it, it's again, you look at fits. And obviously, unless Minnesota traded that first pick away, there was no one that fit on that roster better than Anthony Edwards does. So
Exactly.
I mean, even let's say Clay does get hurt, then it's, oh man, either, and the severity of it, it's, I got to find a way to trade to get the number one to take Edwards. So still at that same standpoint, it's you're taking at that point, in my opinion, not only your best fit, but also still the best player that was available.
Yeah.
And so again, like I said, it just makes so much sense. And again, I guess so shifting to another team. Obviously, this is my second team, my hometown team, Atlanta Hawks. I love what they did.
Yeah.
I really do. And Yeko Kongwu from USC, and again, shout out Chino Hills. He had 2 lottery picks in this
Yep.
draft with LaMelo Ball going to Charlotte. But I was looking at a lot of stuff about him, and one of the comparisons that I saw that really got me excited because I'm a huge fan of his and how he plays down in Miami is Bam Adebayo.
Yeah.
And the comparison was more so on the defensive end, not the offensive end. And I mean, obviously, Bam is a great offensive player, just so versatile the things he can do. But when you think about this Hawks team, and I've said this Now, I said this last night too. The last two drafts, they've really had a good focus on defense, which is great because obviously their focal point of the team is not very defensive minded. So you have to help him out in any way possible, being Trae Young. So you add Cam Reddish, who has already looked like he's got all NBA defensive team caliber capabilities.
Yep.
DeAndre Hunter, who's going to be a very solid 3-and-D type wing for years to come. Then now you come over here and you add a Kongwu, who is so versatile in those pick and roll switches, can guard a little bit of everyone on the floor. I love that theme that they continue to add. And then you look at some of the rumors of who they might add in free agency, whether it's a Rondo or whomever. It's like, okay, these pieces are starting to come together. You should be able to make the playoffs next year. And then after that, let's see how this thing really turns out.
Yeah, I mean, first with the Kongwu, I have his stats up from Real GM right now. 2.7 blocks per game at USC and 2.7 personal fouls per game, which I think is a really good number for a big, because that's showing me he's able to defend and really contest without fouling. Now, I mean, so that's like halfway to a DQ, but how often do you see big guys especially pick up 2 fouls in the first 4 minutes of a game and then they can't play the rest of the half? And without having seen USC play a ton, I think I watched 1 or 2 of their games last year just in the course of watching Pac-12 basketball. That stat would lead you to believe that he did not have that problem a whole lot. So I think that's big. And, as much as I love Damian Jones, that was an issue for him if you're looking at the Atlanta Hawks. And it has been one that, started at the beginning of his professional career. I saw him a lot in Santa Cruz. Fantastic dude, amazing athlete, really smart guy. But he did have foul issues. And so you look at those numbers, he's, averaging a little more blocks per game, like a 300th of a block more per game than personal fouls. I think is a pretty cool stat there. And the other point, as I've rambled on for Okongwu for 5 minutes, I almost forgot what I was going to say. But the Hawks, if John Collins wasn't out for 25 games last year, who knows how much closer they would have been.
100%.
I mean, it wasn't like – I got to pull up the NBA. They were maybe 6 or 7 games behind the Washington Wizards for the number 9 spot that would have potentially gotten them into the bubble.
So they were right. They were actually 2.5 back of the Wizards, and then they were 10 back of the Magic, who were the number 8 seed.
So there you go. All you needed to do is make up 3 games in those 25 without John Collins, and you give yourself a fighter's chance at the top 8. And I know this is like, all right, you're living in crazy land here, Kevin. But think about it. Like, Washington essentially kind of, I'm not going to say they punted on the bubble, but like there were so many guys that were out and, decided not to play in the bubble. And they had kind of like a shell of themselves in there. But, so did Brooklyn. And like if Atlanta brought its full team to the bubble, I think they could have easily finished within 4, if they were going to be within 6 games of 8. I think they could have easily finished within 4 games of either Atlanta or not Atlanta or Orlando or Brooklyn. Now, Brooklyn played very well under Jacques Vaughn there, but I don't think it would have been out of the realm of possibility that, hey, this team could force its way into 1 or 2 play-in games.
No, I agree 100%. And the thing that going forward that you still love about the Hawks, at least what I love about the Hawks, is we still have to see what Clint Capella is going to bring to this team too.
Yeah.
Now that's one of those unknowns where, everyone, when that trade first happened, most people in NBA circles were thinking, well, who's going to play center for the Rockets? Who's going to play center? What are they going to do? And then meanwhile, on the Hawks fan side, I'm like, finally, we have a rim protector. That is something where, you can go back to the Al Horford, Paul Millsap days, or even before that with Joe Johnson. I know Josh Smith was a great shot blocker, but he's not. He's more so a guy that's going to come on help side, or chase downs and get to you like that. But they never had that one true center that was just going to be a rim defender, say like since I don't know, maybe even Dikembe. So that's the thing that was so exciting about it. And again, like I said, now they're just adding more defensive players, and so it's going to be exciting for them. And so Kevin, with that, transitioning a little bit, so going to Anthony Edwards, again, number one pick from the University of Georgia. A lot of people are making comparisons to Andrew Wiggins for him. And you saw, I'm sure if any of you all saw draft coverage last night, they talked about it a lot. Does he really care about the game? Is he going to be this? Is he going to be that? What do you think about that?
So, I mean, that's interesting. My old school philosophy kind of like, to me, a guy has to love basketball. I don't know, like, and he was just on the jump and he kind of clarified and he said, yes, I love basketball. That initial response when he said, oh, I'd rather watch football, basketball isn't my thing. Like, I could be a pretty good rapper. I don't rap like Dame. I rap like Lil Baby. I question his music preferences if he's going to think Lil Baby's a better rapper than Damian Lillard.
Easy now. Where are we talking to?
Yeah. but outside of that, I mean, he did say he loves basketball. I initially was concerned. But, that's one of those things like when you're 18 or 19 years old, you don't necessarily word things the way you want to, per se, the first time around. I remember, I was on the radio, I mean, KZSU, but like when I was on the radio, my freshman, sophomore, up until my mid-20s, I would say things that I'd go back and say, I didn't exactly mean it like this. And I imagine that Anthony Edwards didn't exactly mean it like that. It's like, oh, well, all right, yeah, football was his first love. I know a lot of basketball players where football was their first love too. I don't think there's any harm in saying that. But yeah, I think that's just one of those things. And Vince Carter on the jump yesterday said he's not worried about it, that a lot of these kids from his age, call him kid, young man, they don't necessarily watch basketball in the same way that players from Vince Carter's era does it. So, like, while I would like to hear someone who lives, breathes, and bleeds basketball, there's more than one way to skin a cat, if you will.
No, absolutely. And I trust me, I know what you mean about you wishing that you would you could say things differently. So a little backstory for me from that standpoint. I remember when I was getting destroyed by Georgia Bulldog fans on like blog sites and stuff because I was saying how part of the reason why I didn't want to go to, or I chose Stanford over Georgia is because I didn't know if Coach Rick was going to be around for long. And people, like, everyone loves to say on the outside, right? You pick the school, not the coach. Yes, but at the same time, who are the ones you're making the relationships with in recruiting?
Yeah.
Who are the ones that are telling your, mom and dad or grandma, grandpa, aunt, uncle, whomever, that we're going to take care of your son or daughter, depending on what sport it is, like they were our own. And the school's not saying that. The coaches are. Yeah. That's the person that, whenever they call you or you go to the visit, those are the people you're spending time with. So it really does matter. But my thing was, I think it came off as that was like the only or the main reason I was making the decision. And it's like, no, first and foremost, I'm making the decision because it's Stanford. Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, so I completely know what you mean by that. And I think the thing too for him is, and I'd have to go back to when Andrew Wiggins was going through his draft process, but some of the people and some of the things that I'm hearing and seeing people say about Anthony Edwards, whether it was Dwayne Wade praising him, Victor Oladipo praised him. Obviously those are Tom Crean guys, so that makes sense. I think Michael Jordan had some praise to say about him. Something just tells me from a competitive standpoint, if you hear certain guys like that saying you've got next or you're better at this than I was or better at this than I was, that competitive flame just kind of gets going. It's like, hey, you know what? And if you hear him talk, he already knows how good he is and how good he can be. He'll tell you. And I think when you get that reinforcement though from those type of guys, that just takes it up to a whole different level. Like, you want to prove them right, obviously yourself right, everybody else. So I'm with you where it's like, I'm not too worried about him, putting in effort or anything like that. I really am not.
Yeah, it's just, like I say, I would like I see someone who says I like. There are guys, and I haven't watched enough Anthony Edwards to say how much he loves basketball. There are guys when I watch, I could be like, that guy loves basketball, and
Sure.
those are the guys that I want on my team. But I
Hmm.
can't make that. What I'm saying is I can't make that distinction yet about Anthony Edwards because, all right, I didn't become a draft guru in the last 6 days, and just like I haven't watched enough. I watched Georgia for a few minutes last year, so like I'll make that distinction later when I see him play for the Minnesota Timberwolves this year. One thing I do want to bring up since you mentioned, well, two things. A, I would never want to be the target of an SEC fan board's angst. That, I mean, that had to be scary. And B, well, Mark Rick did not. You were in college longer than Mark Rick was at Georgia by the time you got there, so you were pretty right on the head. I mean, it was a thing at Georgia. Like their fans wanted to fire him every year. He'd go 9-3, 10-2, and they'd want to fire him every year. It was
Some of
it
them
was
want Kirby
incredible.
Smart fired now.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and the crazy thing about it too is one of my friends. So he ended up playing at Alabama. Geno Smith. He played at St. Pius. So we basically played each other from middle school through high school.
A different
And
Geno Smith than the West Virginia quarterback.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
Okay,
this guy was a corner.
Okay.
And he told, like, I remember talking to him the day I was going to commit. I was like, "What did you say?" Because he had already committed to Alabama. And I was remember texting like, "What did you say? You know, how did you go about this?" And so he was giving me pointers. And one of the things that we talked about too is just be ready. Like the Georgia fans are not going to be happy because he was saying about how they slandered him too for committing to Alabama.
Yeah.
Where, I mean, if you're a football player, like, of course you want to go to Alabama. That makes a lot of sense to me.
Exactly.
So that's just one of those things. And again, it's one of the reminders of it's a different world when it comes to football down there than it is over here and other places in the country.
It just means more. That's their tagline.
Absolutely, exactly. All right, so just moving on. There was one pick. It seemed to be pretty. What's the right way to put it? Controversial. I know some people love it because it's one of those things where you get the New Yorker to play for the Knicks. Other people don't like it because they wanted the Knicks to get a guard. Obi Toppin, Player of the Year from Dayton, coming home to play for the Knicks. What do you think about that pick?
I mean, it's just one of those things where you see the guy's highlights and he just explodes off the tape to you. I mean, this was a guy who had to redshirt his freshman year at Dayton, but 2 years later, I mean, he's given you 20 and 7.5, and just kind of the force and the authority of those numbers were like they're eye popping. And this was a guy who I saw a lot of mock drafts have him going 5th overall. And so I like him a lot. I've talked to others who are worried about how well he can play defense at the NBA level, and that's a concern. I was talking about. I'll bring up the text, but there were concerns about just kind of how his frame would translate to the next level with respect to the defensive end. But if you're the New York Knicks and you see a guy that he was the NCAA Player of the Year, that's hard to ignore. I like Obi Toppin. Again, I did not see a whole lot of Dayton this last year. I watched a lot more G League and NBA, and I watch college. I enjoy watching college basketball, but it has to take a backseat to the other sports that I'm broadcasting. If I have a men's game, then I'm going to watch more men's games. But from what I saw in the highlights, and obviously they're highlights, it looks like a stud.
Yeah, and I think so. This is one of those things where the casual fans or just basketball people in general. This is where it's so unfortunate that we didn't get to see the rest of the conference tournaments or the big dance, where you get to see guys like Obi Toppin and a lot of other small school. I mean, even an Anthony Edwards potentially. Whether Georgia went to the NIT or the SEC conference tournament, whatever it may be, where you didn't get to see these kind of guys and really get the feel of, oh yeah, this is how good he really is or could be. But one person, I forget who it was, but one take that I saw on Obi Toppin, and I thought that was pretty interesting, was somebody was saying that they think that the energy that Obi Toppin could bring to the Knicks is similar to the energy that Blake Griffin infused to the Clippers. Because
Wow.
it's a high flyer guy. It's going to
Yeah.
bring you the highlights. So and I guess the other thing you look at it too is Blake came in and then you paired him with DeAndre. Those were your high flyer guys. Well, look what the Knicks have now: Obi Toppin and Mitchell Robinson.
Yep.
Two dudes that play well above the rim. Now, of course, I'm not trying to sit here and say Obi's going to be as good or talented as Blake Griffin because we see what Blake still is now. He might not jump as high or as much as and often as he used to, but such a really good crafted player. But again, there is a lot to be said about bringing the right energy into a franchise, into a team. So we'll see if Obi Toppin is able to do that for the Knicks.
Yeah, and the other thing about Obi Toppin, Dayton was 29-2 last year.
Yeah,
like
they
were going to be a 1 seed, and who knows, like if that meant they were a Final Four team, and like if he goes to the Final Four, I don't think he lasts to number 8. And I think the same thing could be said, like for a lot of people think if James Wiseman played a full season in Memphis, like there wouldn't be a discussion that he would be on his way to the Timberwolves, or Minnesota would be trading out of that pick because they have Karl Anthony Towns. I think people would say he was going to be a clear-cut number 1 pick if he played the full season. So yeah, that kind of worked against Obi as well.
No, absolutely. But again, like I said, hopefully, and I think the whole basketball world wants this. Hopefully, he can bring that energy to the Knicks, to the Garden, to where eventually these next few years we can start talking about the Knicks again as a really relevant franchise in the NBA. But lastly, with draft talk, Kevin, this is the biggest question I have for you. Will LeVar Ball now get that one-on-one game with Michael Jordan since LaMelo is coming to Charlotte?
Never lost. If as he might say, if you don't have 2 sons who are picked in the top 3 of the NBA draft, you're not a big baller. Like, how about that? LaMelo Ball going 3rd overall. And there's another guy, Mike Schmitz of ESPN, great draft analyst. He had him as the top overall prospect.
Mm-hmm. Yes, he did.
And it's just one of those things where, well, Minnesota has D'Lo and the Dubs have Steph and who, hopefully Clay in the 2021-22 season. And so he goes number 3. I love that for Charlotte. Here's a guy who's going to bring some brand name recognition. And yes, you have very good backcourt players already in Rozier and Devontae Graham. But adding LaMelo Ball, Mitch Kupchak, the GM of Charlotte, said, we're drafting for talent. We're not in a position right now to say need over talent. We need to get as much talent as possible. Yeah, I thought they accomplished that with LaMelo Ball at number 3. And one more thing on LaMelo Ball, I was interviewing Darrington Hobson for my Santa Cruz Warriors book. Darrington, former Santa Cruz Warrior, former second-round draft choice in Milwaukee. He played for Illawarra this last year. Now, he got there after LaMelo Ball got hurt, but he said, like, the best dude ever, like a really good dude. They still talk a little bit, or at least that was as of a few months ago, but had great things to say about LaMelo Ball off the court.
Yeah, one thing too, another former NBA champion here in the Bay, Andrew Bogut, had to say about LaMelo Ball. He said one of the best passers that he has ever played with.
Yeah.
And of course, you think about some of the guys that he was with on those championship teams, and even beforehand, high praise for LaMelo Ball. And I'm with you too. I love that pick for Charlotte.
Yeah.
I think that. I know they paid all that money for Terry Rozier, and I'm not going to say anything bad. Terry obviously earned it when he was in Boston. He obviously earned that money, but I think he is in a better fit, and it might not be opening day this happens, but I think in the long run, he's a better fit being that energy guy, 6-man bucket getter off the bench once LaMelo makes his way into that starting lineup, because we know what's going to happen. You don't draft third overall picks to be a bench guy.
Yeah, kind of funny, like how the Chicago Bulls have a bunch of guys who are like coming off the bench on their college teams. Like Patrick Williams was like a six man at Florida State. Zach LaVine, a six man at UCLA, now with the Chicago Bulls. But my last point on LaMelo, he averaged 17 and 7 in Australia, and those numbers are not easy to
At
get in
all.
that league.
At all.
So for a kid who is 18 at the time or 19, like, very impressive.
He's not going to be afraid when opening day comes around. He's played around pros. Now, obviously, I'm not going to say that the Australian league's the same as the NBA, but the fact that he's already been in a league with some grown men and put up good numbers, he's not going to be afraid when those lights come on for the season to start. So transitioning, again, talking about the Warriors, we all feared the worst when we heard there was an injury yesterday. The worst was proven true. Klay Thompson has torn his Achilles. So it's going to be the second year now in a row that Klay Thompson misses. And, Kevin, you and I, we've talked about this a lot. When you were in Chase Center last year, first year it's there, you could just have that feeling of, man, when they get Steph back and when they get Klay back and then whatever they do in the draft or whoever they trade for, this place is going to be rocking. And obviously that was before COVID happened, where you can't have full capacity. And of course, there was just a plan that the Warriors proposed, I think, to the San Francisco Health Council for 50% capacity. They just tore that. They declined that, which I think we expected. But now it's also, now Klay's hurt again. And so, thankfully you still have Steph, knock on wood. And, Draymond, I think Andrew Wiggins is going to still be a really good part of that team. But it just doesn't feel the same anymore. Like everyone was just excited. I think everyone around the NBA was excited. Splash Brothers are back. So much fun to watch. You see how many other teams changed the way they play. Look at what Houston did to try to match what the Warriors could do. And now you got to wait another year.
It's an absolute gut punch. No other way. Like, the wind has been knocked out of you if you're a Warriors fan. It is tough. And I could say that word another 40 times and it wouldn't describe how tough it is to see this happen. He was back to full strength. We were ready to see him go. And unfortunately, the injury yesterday, just really tough news. And I mean, you think about that lineup, and it kills me to think about this now, but you run Steph, Klay, Dre, Wiseman, and Wiggins as your starting five, and you bring – and your front court depth now with Marquise Chris and Eric Paschall off the bench. And I'm a big Jordan Poole guy, Damian Lee, like that top nine right there alone, not to mention, the further depth and what else they could do in free agency with that $17 million trade exception. That depth was going to be pretty good. Now, obviously, there's still a lot of good pieces there, but Klay was, one of the guys, right? This dynasty started with Steph, Klay, and Dre.
Yep.
And he's not going to be there for the second straight year now, and that just sucks.
Yeah, and even looking from a Warriors standpoint, you think about a lot of the moves that they made last year, and obviously you're not planning on this to happen, but now is, hindsight being 2020, it's like, dang, what if they would have had some of those guys that they traded before? Like, maybe what if they had an Alec Burks kind of guy still? They made the trade with Philly. You just think things like that. And maybe even a hypothetical of what if you still have D'Lo? Now, I know that means you have a hole in the 3 spot, but it's just one of those things that I think those gears start to churn in your head a little bit. I think overall every move that the Warriors made up to this point has been the right move. But now it's just unfortunate that, here we are. And again, like I said, I think everyone around the league, it just sucks just to watch how these guys play together. Again, you talk about someone that can give you 60 and maybe dribble the ball 15 times, which is incredible. And then, everyone always says it, tough as nails, just a great dude, hardly ever misses timing. We saw him walk off the floor in the finals last with a torn ACL so he could hit the free throws. It's just a gut punch, not just to the Warriors, but to the league in general. And yeah, my prayers, thoughts and prayers with Clay, not even just physically for his return, but mentally. You got to think you missed out on a whole year. That had to be hard.
Yeah.
And now you got to do it all over again. So
Yeah.
thoughts and prayers to you, Clay.
Waddy, I'll add this. Kari and I were at Game 6, 2019 NBA Finals. And when he came back out of the tunnel, it was a visceral moment. Like, it was goosebumps inducing. That place erupted. I was there in 2007 I was there for all the playoff games in the We Believe run in 2007. And like when Barron's yammed on AK-47, Andre Karolinko, like exactly. I wish he made the free throw, but but like I didn't think Oracle could get louder than when Barron dunked on AK. It went to another level when Clay came out of the tunnel. It was the last game in team history at that place. Just the stakes of that game and seeing Clay come back. I am so happy that I spent a few $100s on tickets that night to be there for that singular moment. I mean, unfortunately, the ACL tear, I'm not happy for that.
For sure.
But like, just the roar of that crowd was incredible.
So again, Clay, our thoughts and prayers with you and for you.
Yes,
hopefully we get to see you back next year. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and then when we are back, Pac-12 Network's best, Ashley Adamson, is going to join us. We're going to talk about this crazy year, how things look different for her, and also I have a very interesting question for her. We'll see what her answer is. We'll be right back. All right, everyone. Welcome back to the From the A to the Bay podcast. Jordan Watkins alongside Kevin Dana. And I'm so happy to announce the host and the Pac-12 Network, the best there is. Ashley Adamson's with us, and she has the most awesome football behind her, too. How's it going, Ashley? How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I actually get a lot of grief, Jordan. I'm glad that you saw that because I've got quite a bit of Stanford paraphernalia in my office here. I've got
no problem.
John, I don't know if you can see it. I don't know that this isn't going to be interesting to the podcast listeners, but I got my guys, John Elway over there. I got that. The football that you're seeing is the from the Rose Bowl, Iowa Stanford, the Christian McCaffrey. Yeah, paying back all of the Heisman voters. That's the way that I always remember that game. So yeah, no, it's good to be here. I'm excited to be on. This is a big deal. Thanks for having me, guys.
Oh, thanks for hopping on. Obviously, I know it's been interesting trying to find a time to get you because there's so many differences right now with how the year's going. Obviously for a long time it was the Pac-12. Is they going to come back with football? If they do, how's it going to look? And so finally here we are. We are, I believe, 2 weeks in, going on week 3. And so I guess just overall in the network, how's everyone feeling with how it's been going so far?
It's been a roller coaster, I think, just like everybody else in 2020, right? I mean, there's been so many moments along the way that you felt really good and really excited and like, okay, we're turning the corner. And then, your balloon gets popped the next day or the next week or whatever. So there's been admittedly some really hard times for the network and for the conference, I think, as they've tried to navigate this thing. Again, I'd just say that we're not obviously alone in that. But I think the way that we feel right now, 2 weeks in, is just so happy to finally have games to talk about, to actually see Pac-12 teams in action, to actually have a studio show for the first time in 8 months, like in the San Francisco studio. I went back for the first time in 8 months, 2 weeks ago, I guess now. And it's weird. It was like a time capsule. I found all these notes on my desk about, the last call that I had with Tara Vanderveer before I left for Vegas for the women's basketball tournament. And I was just laughing. I'm like, I don't even know what any of this means about their black uniforms. Like, what is this? So it was, I think overall it feels, despite all of the chaos and all of the newness and all the things that feel not quite right, there is a sense of joy around the fact that we actually get to watch games and talk about them and be together again, physically distant, but at least in the same room, wearing masks and a lot of plexiglass now all over the Pac-12 offices. But it's there's at least a slight like shimmer of return to normalcy. And then guys, basketball season is going to be here like before we know it. We're going to blink and we're going to be playing whatever it is, 9 games on next Wednesday. So I do think that we've made it through some really hard times. And I think now that we've got actually games going on, there's a renewed sense of optimism, I would say.
Yeah, we're recording this on November 19th. So 6 days from today, the basketball season returns. Ashley, kind of walk us through what the like middle of March to, until you got into the studio was like, because you were hard at work interviewing all sorts of Pac-12 athletes and dignitaries and doing that over Zoom from your home. What was that like for you?
Yeah, Kevin, it was hard. Honestly, that sounds so silly. There were so many people I kept trying to always keep in mind the perspective of there are people who are going to work in hospitals with hundreds of COVID cases right now. There are people whose family members are dying and who are sick. And so I kept always trying to have that perspective of like, okay, so you're stuck in your bedroom doing interviews with people on Zoom. Like that seems like actually a pretty good outcome. But I will say it was just really hard. I am a person who gets energy from other people, and I am a extrovert through and through. And I think for me, especially early on when the lockdown first happened and we weren't going anywhere, it's just really disorienting. And I've got, you guys know I've got 2 small kids, a 1.5-year-old and a 4-year-old. And that is a blessing and a curse, I would say, in the time of COVID, because it keeps you busy and it keeps you, focused on things. They don't global pandemic really going on. They don't understand what that means. So they still need to show up and be their mom every day. So that's given me, I think, some purpose. But in terms of the work stuff, I just think it was really hard to reorient and figure out how we were going to move forward and create content and tell these stories. And the one thing, the silver lining, I think, that has come out of all of this is sort of the what's allowed or what's acceptable to be on television is different today than it was 8 or 9 months ago, right? Like you see pretty crappy Zoom interviews on the major networks now. And it's like, oh, okay. But it's nice because you can get people where they are. We are no longer asking people to go to the campus cam room that we have set up that's really far away from their office to go do an interview with us. That was always the hardest part about trying to schedule some of the interviews that we did and talkbacks that we did over the last 8 years. So now everybody's got Zoom on their phone, and we got Sam Neuer after the Stanford game, like right before he was about to go catch the bus, and he was great. He just threw on some headphones and did the interview with us, and it was awesome. So I do think we've kind of condensed space and time a little bit more and have relaxed what we think is acceptable to put on television. If it makes a good story and it's good content and it's a good guest, just book it. But yeah, it was to answer your initial question, it was tough. And then also, I mean, I'm just to be totally honest with you guys, and everybody knows this, but the layoffs that we had right when COVID hit in March were really hard. We had so many good friends and colleagues who, I'd been at the network with since day one. And all of a sudden, pretty much the entire studio crew was mostly laid off. And those were the people that I worked directly with. And obviously Mike Yam's contract wasn't renewed. And so I think I look back on that period and it was really sad and really disorienting and really hard. And I think, again, that's why I say, like, now that we're back to having games and a lot of people have landed on their feet and sort of figured out the way forward, it was hard to see back then how it was all going to shake out. And now as we sit here, in mid-November, there are a few more answers, certainly, and hopefully more to come. So yeah, just like you guys, it's been a roller coaster.
And it's one of these roller coasters, and the only thing is, usually when the roller coaster is going to end, right? That's the last drop or the last climb or loop the loop or whatever it is.
Point.
I don't know when this roller coaster is going to end, but
that's a great point. That's actually, roller coaster is a bad analogy because you do know that there's going to come in.
Oh man, but so yeah, but I know, I guess going forward, you're talking about the Zoom calls and everything that have been going on. It looks so much different. Obviously, just recently, basketball media days came and went. Just walk through some of the differences, whether it's overall production and just the feel for it yourself. Like you said, you feed off energy of other people that are with you in the room. So how different was that, and how did you get that energy? How did you generate it in different ways?
Yeah, and this is probably another bad analogy by me, but it's like The same way in that we were wondering how on earth are these players going to go out and play a game without any fans in the stands, and where are they going to get the, the energy from? And it was just going to, as soon as you start playing, as soon as you start going, it doesn't really matter if you're looking at somebody on a screen or if you're sitting next to them, probably. But in some ways, I think it's made all of us better at our jobs. I would say. I'd be curious what you guys think from where you sit, but I think when you're in studio and sort of in just the nature of being in a television studio and having people running around and cameras here, and there's so many different dynamics of what needs to happen for a show to come together. When you're at home on Zoom, the only thing that you can focus on is how good the interview is. Like, none of the camera shots don't matter. All of the ancillary stuff, I mean, other than like a kid running into the room, none of that really is in your control. And so being able to just actually sit there and have a real, okay, how are we great a real connection with over a computer screen. I did a lot more research and a lot more homework. And I think it was really one of the, as I look back on all of those interviews we did when we launched our daily podcast, right when the pandemic hit, that I'm really thankful for, that there were so many people that we had access to that we would have never even asked for before, or even thought that we'd be able to get. I mean, Steve Kerr is a great example. We've been trying to do something different with him, over the last 8 years, and finally a pandemic hits and we get him for 45 minutes on our podcast, and he was phenomenal. So I just think there's as I look back, there were a lot of opportunities to create content that we would not have created had the pandemic not hit. And, to answer your question, Jordan, I think it's just a matter of being able to, you just adjust, right? Like, humans are pretty resilient, and you sort of get used to whatever your new normal is. And the only in-person interview I have done with a coach or a student athlete or anybody since I was in Vegas was when I went down to Stanford and interviewed David Shaw for the medical department at Stanford, or the School of Medicine, I should say, put on a virtual tailgate, and an interview with David Shaw was part of the virtual tailgate last week. So I did a long interview with him, outside at Stanford Stadium, and it just felt so good. I mean, we were, 10 feet apart, and when we weren't, everybody had their masks on, and it was all the things, but it just felt so good to like see his face in person and not over a computer screen, which is what I've been, we've been looking at him for the last several months as we've done all of these different Zoom calls and press availabilities. So I do think that this is a blip in the radar. I do think that we're going to get back to doing what we love in the way that we used to do it on some level. But I think being able to be a little bit more comfortable, a little bit more versatile, and just let go of all the other stress that comes into when you normally feel that compounding as you're getting ready to do a studio show, and all the things that have to go right to get, live TV on the air.
Actually, I wanted to follow up with a point you made there, like getting back to the new normal as far as how we do things on television. I'm curious, how acceptable do you think the things that became acceptable with respect to maybe, video quality, production quality, will last beyond, say, when everyone gets vaccinated?
That's a great question. I think it will last. I think, and it's a double-edged sword, guys, because you sit here and we all work in, sports broadcasting media world. And as soon as, and I've seen it, I came up through local news, so I saw it a lot then. As soon as some sort of cost can be eliminated and the viewers either don't care or they realize like, hey, it's actually not that big of a deal that we didn't have this high-end shoot or this certain thing or X, Y, or Z or this position necessarily, it's hard to bring that back. And so I think there's been a lot of decisions that have been made in order to cut costs, whether it's moving to automation, having one fewer people, not having as many runners, having one audio person. For us, it's, again, we don't have a director per se anymore. Everything is automated in our studio shows. And so again, it's a double-edged sword because it's eliminating positions. I mean, it's just be upfront about what it is. I think you're eliminating positions in this new world, but also the other side of it is that, going back to what we were saying earlier about the Zoom availabilities and just the thinking outside the box of what you would normally think was okay for, network television, those standards have changed. And I think for the most part, for the better, right? Like, if it's a great interview, I don't care that it's a little grainy or that the audio isn't perfect. Would I like to see a beautiful crystal clear shot and a crystal clear mic? Of course. But I think that, when you work in the business, you care way more about that stuff than sometimes the viewers at home do. And so I think we've all sort of been reminded that over the last 8 months, that people, the hunger and the thirst and the desire to watch good content is always going to be there. And so let's get even more creative about how to do it and how to make it better. And hopefully, I think, there will be a lot of things that we learned about how we're doing television that we'll take moving forward. I mean, I think that's true in every single industry that I know someone in right now. I think everyone has learned things that they're going to take with them moving forward. I mean, even you take recruiting. Every coach I've talked to says, it's been brutal that we haven't been able to bring them on campus, that we haven't been able to show them our facilities, but we've now created this incredible library of content of how we're showing them our campuses, how we're introducing them to big time alums, and just stuff that we would have never thought to do before that's really powerful. So eventually it'll be great when we can get people back on campus, but also we'll still be able to continue to use some of the techniques that we've developed over the last 8 months. So I do think everybody is sort of changing and adjusting, and there'll be some good that comes out of it, no doubt.
So one thing I'm curious about, and I guess this kind of goes back against the topic of new content or different content, and the availability of Zoom and everyone. So with the content also changing and part of this is because of certain things that happened over the summer with racial injustice and police brutality, things of that nature. I know you were obviously involved with a lot of different conversations on air than with the Pac-12 network or other networks in general they usually show, whether that was with certain athletes, maybe professors or other people in the community. Just tell me about how that was, and how it was being a part of it, getting it on air, and the importance that meant for you.
Yeah, and I appreciate you bringing that up. And I think, Jordan, one of the most important things, and I've actually been thinking about this a lot in the last week, is the idea that, and we said it a lot in the beginning when everyone was posting stuff and everyone was having these conversations and everyone was putting out statements and press releases and committing to being better and carrying the conversation on. It is really easy to get caught up in whatever the daily stuff is, and all of a sudden it's 6 months later and it's like, okay, what have we actually changed? What have we done? Where have we moved the needle? And the reason I've been thinking about it over the last week is because I feel like that, with all of the swirl going on in basketball now starting, those conversations haven't been happening in the same way that they were before, from a programming standpoint, as well as I think just internally. And so it's something that's been on the forefront of my mind about trying to figure out, okay, how do we make sure we don't lose momentum, and how do we make sure that we're being true to what we said we were going to do, and how are we going to continue to create meaningful programming and give people opportunities to have conversations with each other, like the roundtable that we put together with Stanford, that, by the way, you had a huge part in making happen. And I think that those are honestly questions that I don't have answers for right now. But I think that my hope is that, and I can say this, that there are people internally that are pushing and making sure and trying to hold ourselves accountable to do the stuff that we said we were going to do. Because it's real easy to put a press release out. It's real easy to have different committees and different people, and different initiatives. But at some point, what is it that you're actually doing? And I give a ton of credit to our schools and our teams. I've been so impressed by, and it's the young people. I mean, it's the student athletes who are the ones that are doing it, that are creating momentum, that are pushing for change. All of the different things that we've seen, from, just from logos on the helmet to different jerseys to, different t-shirts that people are wearing, to the fact that, there's just so many different things that I've seen over the last 2 weeks that I'm like, oh, that's awesome. I love that they're doing. I love that they're doing that. And I think with basketball around the corner, we're going to see a lot more. But I do, I'm kind of rambling here, but I think it's because I struggle with that question, Jordan, of what have we actually done, and what are we going to continue to commit to do now that it isn't right in everybody's face all the time, every moment of the day. I should say that it's not in everybody's face for those people who don't have to allow it to be in their face, who have the privilege of it not being in their face. In terms of the social inequities that are happening all over the place. So yeah, I think I've been really lucky to have had the conversations that I've had with so many incredible of our, young Black student athletes. And they have opened my eyes. And Jordan, I've told you this, like they have really opened my eyes to a lot of things that I think I had to come to terms with and struggle with early on, after George Floyd's murder, that, you think that you understand a concept or a situation or something, and then you really, it was sort of jarring to sort of realize that there's so much that I didn't know. And so committing to figuring out and making sure that I understood it, and that I'm making a difference, and that I'm, using my platform and making sure that this isn't just something that we talk about when it's cool to post about, but that we really, truly, truly figure out a way to keep the Black Lives Movement going forward, and making it better, and not just saying, hey, student athletes, you guys, whatever you want to do, we're good with, but actually giving them help and support and structural support around, and resources around making a difference. I think that's on the Pac-12 for sure. And I think that's on the different athletic departments and the leadership on each of our campuses.
As a broadcaster, Ashley, how much more, I'm not sure if comfortable is the right word to say, but since the pandemic, and especially since the police murder of George Floyd, have you felt to speak out and like use your platform? Because I know you come from a news background. I went to journalism school, and one thing that's grilled into us is you don't give your opinion, right? Like you report the news, you state the facts, and obviously there's a lot of facts to state, with respect to George Floyd, police brutality, and how Black Americans have been treated in this country. But I mean, I know personally for me, like it took me a while to figure out how to say what I wanted to say. And then maybe, over the course of the next few months of, having just a couple of gigs and not knowing when we're going back to work, or my filter's kind of gone. But how much more comfortable have you felt to, speak up and do these kind of things, since this has happened?
It's a good question. And I'd say it's night and day what I have felt I don't want to say my responsibility, but maybe that's the word. My comfort level, I don't really know, but I just feel like I have always, and you guys know this too, especially when you work for a conference, is very different even than when I worked in local news, in terms of I don't post anything everything I post is through the lens of, if the president of a school saw this tweet, would they be okay with it? I mean, that's just the reality of sort of my job and my role, and being a front-facing employee of the Pac-12 network that is owned by the conference. There's not a whole lot, my draft box in my Twitter is full. Is probably the best way I can put that. But I do think in terms of what you're saying, like being comfortable and understanding why it's important, like it does matter. And I think, and Jordan, and I give you a lot of credit because you talked me through a lot of this. And I had another conversation with a former Cal player in Mo Ways. I don't think he'd mind me name dropping him here, but I had a 2-hour conversation with him right when everything first happened as well about all of this. And what I realized was that my own discomfort with it, because I was afraid I was going to say the wrong thing, or I was afraid that I was going to look performative. But if I didn't say something, would that have been just as bad as saying the wrong thing? And I was like in my head so much about it. And Jordan, what you helped me and what Mo helped me kind of realize, and Mo said it very straight to me. He said, look, at the very end of our conversation, he said, I don't, you asked me what if there's anything, any advice that I have. And he said, it's that you should understand that even though you don't think it does, your voice carries a lot of weight, and people pay attention to what you say and what you don't say. And so even if you don't know exactly the right thing, not saying anything is way worse. And so like, get uncomfortable, understand what it's like to be uncomfortable, engage, learn as much as you possibly can. And don't be afraid to put yourself out there if it is because you need to be authentic. Don't post something just to post something. But if you are moved by something, if you want to say something, now is the time. Like if it's not now, when is it going to be? And that, it was just really helpful to me to think about it that way, because as you said, Kevin, it is beat into you as a journalist and a news person to understand that it doesn't matter what you think. You should never allow your opinion to enter into your reporting. Now, obviously with social media and Twitter and Instagram being what it is, and I'd say just the way that I would say the industry has evolved, has changed that a little bit and blurred those lines. But I think that it was something that I struggled with, and that finally I just thought, no, you do need to say something, and actually saying maybe kind of the wrong thing or not totally understanding it, but working to do that is way more important than just like sitting this one out and saying, I'm not going to, I don't want to be viewed as performative, or I don't want to be viewed as someone who, is going to try, and I should stick to sports essentially. Like I'm just going to keep doing my thing and I'll retweet or favorite or whatever, but that's BS. That's cowardly, and that's BS in my personal opinion for how I felt. So yeah, I think I'm in a much different place. And sorry that I'm giving you guys like 5-minute answers for every question.
Oh, you're good.
That's cool.
I'm in a much different, that means it's a good question, but I'm in a much different place now than I was in terms of when you talk about comfort and understanding what your role is and the responsibility behind it. I'm in a way different place now than I was 8 months ago. There's no doubt about it. And I think a lot of people are.
Yeah, and Ashley, I mean, I have to give you some credit for this too, because I remember when we had that first conversation, and I was saying about how there's certain things I wanted to say, not want to say, but I don't know exactly if I'm trying to get with this network or that network or whomever, if they're going to agree with it, not agree with it. And one of the things that you said to me, and for anyone that's looking to get into, anyone just looking in any industry period, I would say, Ashley told me this. She said, look, if they can't agree with you on this topic about Black Lives Matter, you might not want to work for them anyway. And honestly, when you said that, I was like, hey, you know what? You're right. And I mean, ever since then, I mean, I know a lot of people have seen my Twitter feed. Like I've talked about this. I've talked about the pandemic or present or whatever it is, just because, it's one of those things. So, you definitely deserve your flowers for that too.
I appreciate that, but I will reiterate that, I've got a long ways to go, and I know that, and this country has a hell of a long ways to go. And I think a lot of people know that and understand that. And I'm hopeful that we are in a different, like, collective sort of space in which, one of the things that I will say too, I was having conversations with my family and friends that I have never had before on topics of racism, and really diving in deep with my dad about how he, thought about teaching us about it, and where we grew up and how we grew up, and did we talk enough about it, was learning about Martin Luther King enough, and just all of these different things that came up that got really intense, some very intense family conversations over the last 8 months that were, again, a little bit embarrassing when you look back on it and realize, like, how have we not had these conversations before? And formative for me as a mom to think about intentionally how I want to have those conversations and what I want to do to make sure that my kids understand more than just the little bubble that they happen to live in. So I think it's definitely, and I again would just reiterate that I'm certainly not the only person that has had that reckoning and awakening. And I think the key now is to really actually do something about it.
How much do you feel like athletes have kind of led the way on this? Because I'll say, like, I kind of drew my strength from, like, at least saying something from, like, WNBA and NBA athletes, and them not being afraid to, like, take whatever consequences may come, and then them seeing, like, all right, people are reacting to them in a positive way. That kind of gave me a little more to, like, say, okay, I feel comfortable in doing it. I'm not saying what I did was right. Like, it's pretty cowardly the way I did it.
No, but I think, like, you make a good point.
Yeah, I just for me, like, following an athlete's lead helped me. I wasn't sure, like, if that's something you kind of saw in society or applied to you.
Yeah, well, the athletes are the people that we look up to, right? I mean, I think that's whether we can say it that way or not. I think athletes are role models and always have been, and whether they want to be or not, and some are better at it than others, certainly. That is the truth. And to me, yeah, I give a ton of credit to the professional athletes, but where I drew the most, and have the most respect for, and was the most impressed and thought, like, these people are doing it, how the hell can I not actually sit here and say what I think and speak up, are the student athletes. like you've got kids in college, and I just think about, guys, it was longer ago for me than it was for either of you, but I think back to when I was in college and where my headspace was at and the stuff that I was sort of worried about and thinking about on a daily basis. And I just, being able to, again, watch what they have done, listen to them, and see them be able to come into their own in terms of having the confidence to actually speak up and call stuff out that needs to be called out, it's been inspiring. And we use that word, overuse it all the time, but I really mean it. It has been so incredible to watch the way that they've found their voice and the way that they've wanted to use their platform. And not everybody, certainly, and I don't think everybody needs to, but there are young people out there who are taking the torch and saying, it is up to our generation. No generation in front of us has been able to solve this. Like, it is up to us to move this thing forward. And so I think that's been the thing that's been the most inspiring to me, is I'm like, hey, if you got an 18 to 22-year-old kids out there that are this articulate and this thoughtful and this engaged and this motivated and are going through all of these things that you can't even imagine, in the bubble that is the different Pac-12 university campuses, if they're living these injustices out on a daily basis, how are we not doing something about it? That's what's given me sort of the strength and the confidence and all the rest, the courage, I guess, to actually speak up, because those are the people that I look up to. They're, several years younger than me. I'm not going to say exactly how many, but they're a lot younger than me, and I'm
just
looking
a couple
up to them in a
years
major
younger.
way, just like one or two.
Yeah.
One or two.
But again, no, Ashley, as we talked about before, she's had some awesome work, awesome conversations and dialogue. I believe they're still on Pac-12 Network website. If anyone wants to check them out, I do recommend them. So switching gears before we let you go, I know I have a question for you, and I think Katie does too.
I have a couple things I wanna pull up, but go ahead, Waddy.
So yeah, for mine, this is more of a fun one. So obviously last week at Stanford, we saw they had, I think, 400 trees that were brought in to the stadium since there are no fans. So my question for you is, what other school would you like to see in the Pac-12 bring in something? Like, would you like to see some flaming pitchforks in Arizona State? Do you want to see 400 Huskies at Husky Stadium? Like, what other college would you want to see something?
Oh my gosh, that is a great question. I got to think about this for a minute. Okay, so I'm just gonna go down the line. I don't think I'd want to see Wildcats. The flaming pitchforks could be good, as long as it was that and not like, devils.
Herm Edwards wouldn't approve of that.
Yeah. Man, that's a good one. I think I'm going to have to go with the Huskies, right? Like, how could you not want a stadium full of the cutest dogs that exist? Like, that's just the sweet. I mean, and then you'd get some crowd noise, I'm just envisioning what that would be, and it would be a little chaotic, but I think it would be. I think that would be a beautiful, beautiful sight. I don't know. What would you go with? I should spend some more time on that, but what would you go with?
I would say, I think from the Husky standpoint, it would be interesting to see what happens if there's a fumble. There's a ball loose on the field, so you might have a fan, and security is going to have to escort that fan out of there. But I think Huskies would be interesting. I think it would be interesting to see. I know it can't happen, but how cool would it be to see 400 Ralphies in the stadium?
I was just going to say, the obvious
cool
answer here is that we need a bunch of bison in Folsom Field. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Just clear out all the, I know they've done a lot of work to make it look really nice, but just clear out all the seats and just have a bunch of bison hanging out. That's the answer. Kevin, who are you going with? By the way, I do got to, Stanford, hats off to them. I thought that was such an awesome. It was just so Stanford. It was so perfect. I love that they partnered with Lowe's. Like, whoever had that idea, kudos.
I think I got to shout out Rob Mosley here a little bit. I think I'd like to see some ducks quacking in the stadium. You wouldn't have to worry about the fumbles or whatever. I don't think they'd be too swayed by a football. Yeah, that's true. That's true. My mom was a cheerleader at Oregon State, so I'm sure she'd like to see pull up, get some beavers in a stadium or whatever. But Luckily, I'm not on the cleanup crew at Adamson, so I'm gonna go with Ducks.
Perfect.
So Ashley, for my there are three things that I kind of wanted to go down memory lane with you.
Oh boy, let's do it.
The first time that I met you, so a little background, I have terrible facial recognition. And so my first job, like working for Pac-12 for Pac-12.org before it was even .com, was a 2012 football media day. And I knew that I was working with Nick Lloyd, Sam Silverstein, and Sarah Cazell. And I had met Sarah twice. You guys look nothing alike. I want to get that out the way. But I sat down next to you on a couch at the hotel by Universal Studios, and I thought you were Sarah. So I started talking to you like you were Sarah Cazell. And then I very quickly realized by the way you responded that, oh, you're not Sarah. And so then I was like, oh, I'm Kevin, because I thought we had known each other before. What was kind of your Pac-12 football media day in 2012 experience like?
That, I'm so glad you brought that up. I do not remember that. When I feel bad that I didn't like cover more and be like, hey, because my entire 2012 football media day experience was just pretending like I knew people and things that I did not know. Like that was what I was doing the entire 2 days. And so the story behind that was I was hired to begin August 1st was my first official day with Pac-12. And I had moved out to the Bay Area in, I think, like the second week in July. And right before I moved out, I got a call from Leon Schweier who said, hey, would you want to come? Just come to media days. You don't have to do anything. We're not going to ask you to do any of the interviews or like actually do anything on the air, but just I think it'd be good if you're going to be in the area, we'll fly in and just put you up for a couple nights. And then at least you can meet the coaches and have a sense of, get to know some people. And so I was like, okay, yeah, I said yes, only because there was very low, it was like very low risk and it would be great to meet everybody and connect with everybody, blah, blah, blah. So I show up the day before the first full media day, and Kristen Bredis hands me like an envelope with all these papers and just says, hey, they're actually want you to do the interviews tomorrow with all the players.
Oh,
and I was like, are you kidding me? Like, what? And again, just to understand, like I had just left another job in Indy. I was just diving into everything. I did not know. I was not qualified to be conducting half-hour interviews with every player on media day. And so that, like, I remember my experience of media day was that I was like buried in those notes. I was trying so hard to learn everything I could in, 10 hours. And then also just trying to meet everybody and be as nice as I could, because I didn't know anyone. I was hired kind of sight unseen. I don't know if I've told you guys that story, but basically I was about to take another job in Washington, D.C. I had met with Kristen Bredis when I was out in San Francisco a few months before. And right before I took the job in D.C., she called me and was like, hey, we do think that we're going to want one more full-time host. Would you consider coming out here? And obviously that answer was yes. But so I hadn't had an interview or an audition per se. And which is probably the only reason I actually got hired. So if I'd done that, I don't think I would have gotten the job. But I show up and I'm meeting like my bosses for the first time ever and don't know anyone. And then all of a sudden I'm interviewing, 24 student athletes. And I was like, so the fact that I don't remember that, I apologize, Kevin, but just know that you have no reason to be embarrassed, because the entire 2 days I was just talking to people and pretending like I knew them. So I apologize that I didn't do a better job of.
Oh no.
And that's a compliment. I love Sarah Cazell. She's a badass. So I'd be happy to be confused for Sarah Cazell any time of the day.
Yeah, no worries at all. Next thing that I distinctly remember, August 15th, 2012, the first ever show. I want to say it came on at like 7:00 or something. I remember sitting at home. I was still living in my parents' house. I was about 6 weeks from getting my first apartment, and I remember it didn't start exactly like on the top of the hour, bottom of the hour. I was waiting for like a minute or two, and then like it finally popped on. And I remember your first line, you ended it with like, I'm just hoping I don't screw this up, or something like that. What was going through your mind as you were, working with Mike Yam for the first time, launching a network? You literally were one of the first two people that anyone had ever seen on that network.
Yeah, it's funny, Kevin. I like just got goosebumps thinking about that night because it seems like a lifetime ago in so many ways, and it was still one of the most special things I've ever done, and professionally for sure. But um, I remember, and I think probably the reason I said that, a couple funny like backstories on that night. So one is I remember walking into the studio for the last time. We weren't supposed to go live. We were supposed to do everything taped. Everything was supposed to be on tape. So we had been taping like 2 or 3 days in advance. So of course, like the dress I was wearing was covered in makeup and smelled terrible and was like so gross. And I'm like, wait, you guys want me to wear this tonight live on the air? Like, okay, we're going to pretend like we're doing all this live. Sure. And then at the last minute, they realized, oh, we've got all the CEOs, the athletic directors, all of these stakeholders in the building to watch us launch. We need to do something that is live. So Ash and Mike, we're actually going to have you do the open live and the close live. Everything else has already been put to tape, but you and Mike are going to do the open and the close, and we're going to do those live. And so again, I'm still very green, had only ever worked in local news. And I just was so nervous, but excited and kind of just like, let's just see what happens. I'm walking into the studio and I see there are these like boards in the floor, tiles in the floor. And just outside the studio, there's like 3 of them that are lifted up, and there's just all of these cords, like wiring that had been like pulled out and looked like it was being reconfigured. And there were people sort of running around with looking like their heads cut off, engineers trying to fix something. And I just remember like sitting there, I paused and I looked at it and I'm like, man, so many people have been working so hard to make this next moment happen. Like, I could just go in there and totally fall on my face and ruin all of it. Like that was what was all of a sudden going through my mind. I'm like, do not mess this up. It's not even about you. It's about the fact that like the vision of this from the inception of someone saying like, okay, Larry Scott, we're going to make 7 networks, to all of the people who actually then had to make it work in a very small amount of time. The sort of like gravity of the moment actually hit me when I saw all those wires that were frantically being pulled out right before we went on the air. So that was probably why I said that. But yeah, I just think, I think back to that first night and it seems so surreal. And it was kind of just like, I can't believe we're doing this. And it actually is all coming to fruition. And I'm looking up and seeing all of the, ADs and CEOs looking down on us, just smiling with their champagne and feeling like I was, doing my first ever live hit and was about to evaporate and die. Like, how did I convince people that I should be here? I should not be here. This should not be me doing this. And we survived somehow, and we got on the air that day, and we've been on the air ever since. But man, it's fun to think back about those moments because it's easy to lose sight of all the stuff you wish was different or wish was better, or maybe we could have done this and it would have mattered, or if we had this distribution X, Y, or Z. But when you actually step back and think about, so many of those special moments with so many special people that you got to be a part of, it gives me goosebumps all over again.
I lied. I hope you don't mind me asking 2 more questions because
I'm good. I just apologize. I don't know that anyone's still going to be listening to your podcast. But shout out to my dad or whoever else might be. Yeah.
But I was curious because Mike Yan was the other guy on that night, and you guys had great chemistry. You guys pros beyond pros. How long did it feel like it took you, from your perspective, to work and have that good on-air chemistry with Mike?
It's interesting because we didn't actually get to work together until year 3. The first 2 years that we had Sports Report, it was JB Long, who is like another brother to me. He's the, godfather to my daughter, and we're super close with his family and love him to death. And it was all because of that show, really. And then when Mike started hosting that with me, that was when we were always really good friends. Like we hung out a ton. I mean, my life was so different. Everybody's life was so different when we launched, right? Like I was single, I was living in my brother's basement. I didn't have a care in the world other than that job. And so when I wasn't doing that job, we were out hanging out with everyone, who worked at the Pac-12. Like it was a really awesome, special startup feel first couple of years, and no one had kids or anything to really worry about that we now all have in our lives now. And so Mike and I were always really close, off the air, but we never really worked together until that 3rd year. And I will just say it took like 2 shows I remember until I felt like, man, this is, and it's because we were such good friends, I think, going into that. You guys know, right? Like you, as if you're able to broadcast with someone that you, or, you know, share a booth or call a game or something with somebody who you have a close relationship with, it usually doesn't take very long for that on-air chemistry. If it's off camera, you're going to have it on camera. And I think it shows up. So Mike is like a brother to me. I love him to death. I am in this job because of him. I think I look back and think about how much I learned from just watching him, and understanding his process. And, you know, he definitely had totally different strengths, I think, and a different approach than I ever had. But I valued so much being able to be, you know, kind of, this sounds weird, but like I was totally like his sidekick. And it was so amazing for me to be able to watch everything that he did and learn the craft sort of through him, and then be able to be, you know, doing the same stuff as him and hosting together. And we did podcasts together, and it just sort of all, you know, there's a million stories I could probably tell, but the one thing, and I said this on the day that he announced that he wasn't coming back to Pac-12, and I mean this wholeheartedly, and there's very few people that I could ever say this about, and he's probably number 1 on the list. Mike Yam is the person that when you sit down next to him, no matter how unprepared you feel, no matter how, you know, chaotic things are, no matter like whatever, there's a fire in the control room, if Mike is sitting next to you, like, you just know it's the biggest security blanket of all time. You just know that it's going to be fine because he's going to carry it. And if you screw up, he's going to figure out a way to make your screw up look like it was supposed to happen. And he was just so smooth and like the consummate pro. And so I think that was what for me was so special about being able to work so close with him, is not only because of the friendship that we had off the air, but also because of the fact that he just made me better. It's like a teammate. When somebody that you're on the same team with is really good and they lift you up, it makes you look a lot better than you actually are. So all the love to Yammer. I'm glad that, you know, he's doing NFL Network stuff. He's doing Intel stuff. He's got a lot of big time stuff ahead of him. And I'm lucky that I was able to work with him for 8 years.
Yeah, no, he was always great to watch. Last question from me, and I could be totally wrong on this, but I remember the 2013 Pac-12 women's basketball tournament, and I think that's the first time that I remember seeing like an all women's broadcast crew, as I'm like piercing, you know, racking my brain. It's even like on the Final Four for ESPN women's basketball tournament, there was either, you know, Trey Wingo, who is like the host, like the studio show, or male play-by-play. But this is the first time I can remember all the analysts, play-by-plays, studio hosts were all female. What was that like? What was it like working in that environment? And had that been the first time you kind of worked in that scenario, or there's, I know I'm rambling along. Did that have any significance to you?
A huge significance, and I appreciate you asking about it, because I don't think I've, you know, talked much about it. But the women's basketball family at Pac-12 is, I think, to me, one of the most special aspects of the Pac-12. And you're right, Kevin, the women's basketball tournament in particular, it's all women that are calling the games. It's Jill Savage on the sideline. It's Kate Scott, doing pre and post interviews. And it's Roz and Elise and I on set. And so there was, I mean, in the very first year that you're referring to, it was just Roz and I in studio, which, good Lord, I mean, her career has really taken off. I can't believe that she survived, you know, that her career was able to survive that being the entry point, in terms of, we didn't have any idea what we were doing. The two of us just sat on set and like had a blast, but did not know, you know, in terms of like the professional etiquette and how to figure out how to actually be a good studio team. We somehow navigated it, and thankfully they kept asking us back. But the women's basketball group at the Pac-12 Network is so special to me and so meaningful. And it's not only the people on the air. I think that the big story that needs to be told, and I would love for somebody to tell it, is the fact that behind the scenes, we've had a female producer. Colleen Farrell was always our producer. We had women directors. We had women camera ops. We had our, for a long time, the head of our assignment desk was a woman, Laura Podolak, shout out to her. There were all of these women who work behind the scenes, and not to mention, some of the production assistants and people who were doing the cameras on site, the Candace Coots of the world, our former head of digital, and Jessica, who was one of our PAs, who was doing a lot of the different camera work that you see for all the slow-mo shots. So I'm going on and name dropping a bunch of people, but I just think that, to me, that week is so special because of the people and all of the women that you get together for 4 days out of the year. Nobody cares more about the craft collectively from any group that I've ever worked around in my professional career more than that group of women. And it is awesome to be a part of. And we always try and get a picture on set at the end of the tournament, or at some point when we're there, with all of the women who are working for Pac-12. And it's just like such an awesome lady power, these badass women who are so good at what they do. And I just feel so lucky to be, a small part of that group, because they're impressive. They're amazing. So thank you for asking that. I appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Wadi, I've monopolized the time on this podcast. I cede the floor back to you.
Oh, no, you're good. I was just going to add on to that. Obviously, I know the last few years, it's been such a powerful movement about women in sports, respecting the fact that they not only are they there, but they belong to be there because of, what women bring, how much they know sports, how much they love the sport. So it's awesome to see the Pac-12 Network was right there, pioneering it, really, you could say. And I'll also, lastly, I was just going to say, I was thinking about this in terms of my sleepers and of, what other fans would I want to see in stadium, as like, this is my closing thing. So one for Oregon State, they could have 400 chainsaws. And they love those chainsaws on third down, and they annoy the mess out of me. And then lastly, let's see if you guys remember this game. Wazoo could have 400 popcorn bags.
Oh, yeah.
You remember the fans?
In Seattle.
Yeah, it was in Seattle.
Yep.
Well, going back to Sarah Cazell and me being flattered that you would confuse me with her, the best Halloween costume I've ever seen was when she was the popcorn man.
Right.
That's it was just like, this popcorn. That was one of the best costumes I've ever seen in my life. And they ended up finding that guy, didn't they? Like, somebody tracked him down.
I think they did.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure somebody did, which is just so great. That's when you're like, that's journalism right there. If you can find out who that person was, that's straight up journalism.
So
I have one question for you guys before we go.
Yeah.
When are we going to Red Lobster?
Oh, man. So for Roz's birthday in 2013, I remember planning a Red Lobster get together in, I think it was Milpitas.
I had no idea that was a thing until that is Roz. Red Lobster is her jam, and I haven't been back since, and I would love to come back down that way and hit up some Red Lobster.
Never say no to crab legs.
Well, let's do it.
On the side. I don't know if they have outdoor dining now or what the options are. Maybe it's takeout, but I'm in whenever we can make it happen.
I will not say no to crab legs. But no, again, Ashley, thank you so much. This has been awesome to talk to you. And hopefully we'll all be together soon, whether it's in studio, on site for a game, you name it. Take care. Best wishes to you. And we'll see you on TV soon.
Sounds good. And hopefully in real life sooner than that. Love you guys. Thanks for having me on. It's always great to see your faces. And let's do it again soon.
For sure. All right, everyone, welcome back to From the A to the Bay podcast. Obviously, we just got done talking to Ashley Adamson with Pac-12 Networks. And Kevin, obviously, you and I, we know Ashley pretty well already. And I'm just happy that now everyone else who gets to see this podcast, listen to it, you understand how awesome Ashley is, not only in the sports media world, but just as a person too as well.
Yeah, no, she is fantastic. And I know, she's been helpful to a lot of people's broadcasting careers, whether, student athletes or just people who were working at Pac-12 who wanted to get into the broadcasting side. When did you first meet? Because you met her as a player, right? Or
oh, good question. I want to say, well, when we first really started talking a lot, as it came to broadcasting was this was a few years ago. And
Okay.
I think this is after I graduated. And Stanford was set to play UCLA, and I think it was supposed to be on like FS1 or something like that.
Okay.
And like last minute change, they got switched. Like the time got switched, I guess because both teams lost, so they dropped down a TV slot or whatever it was. And so they got put on Pac-12 Network. And I just remember I tweeted, I was like, because I think I have Uverse or Direct, I can't remember, but like they didn't have Pac-12 Network. And so I was like, I got to find a place to go watch the game because I don't have it or whatever. And so Ashley DM'd me and said, like, hey, if you need a place to watch or need something to watch, just let me know. I'll help you out. Also, and then she was just like, yeah, like, I see you're into broadcasting. So, yeah, like we should talk sometime. And so like, that's how that started. Like, she just reached out to me about it, and it's just like, this is the most awesome person ever.
Hell yeah.
And so again, it was just one of those things where, again, it's to show the type of person she is. I didn't reach out to her. She reached out to me to help me out, which is, I've been thinking about where I am now. I couldn't thank her any more for that.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, that's great stuff.
Yeah. So, as we wrap up, obviously, oh, look at this. Oh, so we actually just got a trade alert here for the Warriors.
Okay. Yeah, I was just about to bring that up. You got it.
Yeah. So again, this is Thursday when we're looking at this now. The Warriors nearing a deal with the Thunder because, of course, he was in the Chris Paul deal for the Suns to get Chris Paul. But the Warriors looking like they're going to get Kelly Oubre Jr. here in a trade deal. And I tell you what, I like that fit. You want to talk about someone that brings energy and is really coming into his own as of late as a hooper? Kelly Oubre's been doing that. I like that fit.
I love that fit. Get Wave Poppy here to the Bay Area ASAP. I have been a big fan of his. When he got traded to the Phoenix Suns, he just became a different dude. I mean, last year he was almost 19 a game. And he's doing that, shooting 45 from the field, 35 from three. I'm looking at his stats right now, but and especially with Clay going down, this is huge. Now, that we don't know what the other side of this deal is. I imagine draft picks could be involved because that's kind of the currency Sam Presti's, dealing in right now. But this would be a huge get for Golden State.
Absolutely. And I think the best part about it is you take so much pressure off Andrew Wiggins because now you got another guy that's going to be in there that can score because it's like all of a sudden, at least from the scoring standpoint, it's like, all right, Andrew, you got to step up now. You got to be that number two guy where, if you look at the scoring totem pole, he was going to be number 3. Offensively overall, he was going to be number 4 because Draymond has such an influence and impact on what the offense does. But now, all of a sudden, you bring in Kelly Oubre, that just takes even more pressure off of him. And I mean, you talk about some of the looks that he's going to get with Steph running around left and right. I mean, I'm with you. I'm all for it.
Yeah, hey, all right, maybe they don't have Clay next year, but like this team's got talent.
They definitely do, and a lot of young talent. That's one of the things about it too, which I know a lot of Warrior fans have been thinking about, for the future if they do keep Kelly for whoever knows how many years.
Yeah, and we haven't even mentioned Alan Smiley on this podcast.
Smiley, love Smiley.
Gotta add him.
Now eventually, like one of these days, we just need to have a whole podcast where you tell Smiley stories.
Oh,
KD's Smiley stories are awesome.
Yes. Oh man. Yeah. That might have to wait a couple of years, but nothing like bad on his part. But he is a fantastic dude. Loved having him around.
Yeah. All right. So before we wrap up here, we're just going to go over one football game since we're Stanford guys. We got to touch on it.
Yeah.
The Stanford Cardinal going up against the Washington State Cougars coming up this weekend. Of course, the Cougars, everyone knows them for that air raid style that they've done. And started with Mike Leach, and now Coach Rolovich is there. But one thing that they've really shown is a pretty dangerous and potent run game. That's something that you don't usually see very much from the Cougars. And, with Stanford, this is going to be the first game for them where they have their starting quarterback having a full week of practice. Whether it was Jack West the first week, you didn't know if he was going to be starting until late. Then Davis Mills wasn't activated and cleared to go until I think Thursday. So he had 1 day of real practice. And again, like I've been saying all along, Stanford has weapons. How do you see this one going?
Yeah, I mean, this is a game that Stanford, quite frankly, needs to win, right? You're 0-2 right now. You do not want to be 0-3. If, who knows what a bowl season's going to look like this year, but safe to say you're running out of wiggle room. And so, yeah, I mean, it just sucks that the testing was inaccurate for Davis Mills because, he looked rusty in the first half against Colorado, as to be expected.
Absolutely.
When, that situation popped up. So it just makes it tough. And, this Stanford team has had a really promising ground attack. I mean, especially from what I saw in the Oregon game. And you saw them really get going as that, second half went on against Colorado. They got it all the way down to 3-point game. So, yeah, it's just one of those things, with respect to Washington State. I mean, you mentioned their ground game. Deion McIntosh had a near 100-yard game earlier this year, last week against Oregon. 16 carries. How often do you see a running back at Washington State get 16 carries?
Exactly.
Buddy? Yeah. So
unless you're looking at the season stats.
Yeah, exactly. So, and Jaden DeLora, he put up pretty good numbers. I mean, they lost by 2 touchdowns against Oregon. That was a very close game for most of it. That was competitive into the fourth quarter. And so this is not going to be an easy game. And especially in a year like this where you can't really say home field really makes a difference one way or another. Right? It's more of a hassle to travel. But outside of that, the fans aren't going to be, making a difference in this game. So I think this is going to be very tough. And, if you're 0-2, you have those kind of losing vibes going into a game. Hopefully this is one where you can start to turn around your season. It's going to be a tough game. It's going to be a 60-minute fight, as I know some coaches like to say.
No doubt. I think I can definitely see this one potentially being a shootout. And again, like I said, we talk about all of a sudden this potentially balanced attack that Washington State can throw out there. And again, with Stanford, I feel like from Stanford's standpoint, and not an individual person, just as a collective, this is one of the more explosive groups of skill players that they've had.
Yeah.
You think about all the guys on the outside, Simi Fehoko, there's Wilson, obviously there's Connor Weddington. List goes on and on about some of the receivers they have. You mentioned, Austin Jones and Nathaniel Pete in the run game. They have a lot of dudes that can make plays. So I'm expecting a pretty high-scoring game. And, of course, the biggest X factor, anything can happen in Pac-12 after dark.
Yep.
7:30 kickoff. So I'm sure we're going to see a lot of crazy things happening. We'll see, obviously, for our sake, Stanford get back to the winning ways.
That's for sure. I mean, Davis Mills, after that slow start, he still threw for 327 yards against Colorado. He didn't get targeted a lot. I do like this Elijah Higgins guy. He had a 29-yard reception. You want to talk about skill players, and there were too many to name. He was another one that kind of popped out to me when I saw him play against Colorado.
Absolutely. So, we'll see. Hopefully, I think, again, this will be a week where Stanford gets everything together. That bigger offensive line from last year, I think the average weight's gone up almost 20 pounds from last year.
Yeah, that's huge.
So it is huge. So, we'll see how that goes.
Drew Dahlman, Bay Area guy.
Shout out Drew Dahlman. I mean, talk about Stanford lineage, too.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And of course, his father played there. His sister, Kate, works in the front office for the football program. So all the Stanford ties there for Drew. And, of course, he's the starting center for Stanford. All right. Well, that'll do it. Again, everyone, thanks for tuning in. Thanks again to Ashley Adamson for hopping on. Next week, we will be off. It is Thanksgiving. So with that being said, if you're going to be with family, if you're able to, enjoy the time with your family, your loved ones. If not, FaceTimes or whatever you can do to spend some kind of time with them, but enjoy your special day. Eat a bunch of food, watch football, whatever it is that you have to do to enjoy your Thanksgiving.
No doubt.